What's up, guys? This video is a follow-up to one I made a few months ago about video game elevators that are modeled after this one in Akira. Statistically speaking, you've probably seen that video, but on the off chance you haven't, you should go watch it before continuing this one. Seriously, that video did way better than I could have expected. It was an idea I'd been sitting on for a while that I put together fairly quickly while I was between other projects. I was expecting it to get somewhere between 2 and 20,000 views, but at time of writing, it's sitting at over 400,000 with no sign of slowing down. Now I'm going to address the most common criticisms that I received on that previous video. First off, actually they're called funiculars, or you should look into funicular railways. I received a ton of comments to this effect, including one from Guru Larry of all people. When I first saw these, I was confused, because I thought I had implicitly disqualified funiculars with my requirements in the first video, and I was worried I missed something major in my research. Upon digging into it, it turns out that yes, but actually no. Allow me to clarify. While funiculars do have a number of similarities to Akira-style elevators, they are very much their own thing. To quote Wikipedia, the system is characterized by two counterbalanced carriages, also called cars or trains, permanently attached to opposite ends of a haulage cable, which is looped over a pulley at the upper end of the track. So by definition, funiculars have two separate cars that run opposite each other, usually on two entirely separate tracks. That already doesn't align with what we see depicted in Akira, or any of the games I looked at in the last video. On top of that, many funiculars appear to use more or less standard rail cars that are oriented parallel to the track, rather than being angled to keep the floor level. These would be disqualified per the second rule I laid out in my original video, though I did also find a number of examples that use more Akira-like angled cabs. I'm not sure why so many people seem to conflate funiculars with elevators, but apparently this misconception is common enough that the Wikipedia page for funicular has a section called Comparison with Inclined Elevators that begins with the sentence, "Some inclined elevators are incorrectly called funiculars." So, yeah, they are their own thing, and they don't count for this list. The other big thing people called out, which is something I actually did miss in my initial research, is that diagonal elevators, similar to the one in Akira, do in fact exist in real life. Though in my defense, these things are not at all common. The majority of them seem to date from around the mid-20th century, with only a few still being operational today from what I can tell. Most of the examples I was sent seem to be located in Eastern Europe, usually in mines or other large industrial installations. More recently, this type of lift seems to have been used in Japan as a temporary installation on large construction sites. In either case, definitely not something that's likely to come up on the English-speaking internet. Also, that rock, paper, shotgun article I referenced in the previous video, in that, the author spoke to an inclined elevator company, who essentially told them that massive diagonal freight elevators aren't a real thing. So that didn't help my research any. Finally, I need to clarify what games actually qualify for this list. This isn't something that I thought I would have to do, but I received a number of comments that proved otherwise. For the purposes of this list, I'm only counting elevators from games that have had a full retail release, or are paid DLC for the same. Basically, if it's a finished product, and the only way to legally acquire it is or was to pay for it directly with real money, either through a major digital storefront or physical retailer, then it's fair game. If it's always been a free download, or you can only buy it with fake in-game currency, I'm not going to consider it. This does disqualify most free-to-play titles, as well as things like Black Mesa Blue Shift, which is technically a free mod. However, these requirements mean I don't have to ever dig into the endless piles of slop that are mobile games, browser games, early access games, dead live service games, mods for PC games, or, God forbid, Roblox games. Even with those restrictions in place, there are still way more Akira elevators in games than I can cover in a single video. Today, I'm only going to focus on the most common suggestions that I received. However, I am not going to include any Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, or Armored Core games, because those three series have enough Akira elevators between them to fill an entire video. Maybe even 2 or 3. I'm also not going to be covering Signalis, because that game is in my backlog, I'm planning to play it for Halloween this year, and I don't want any spoilers. I'll include it as an honorary Resident Evil game if and when I make another follow-up. And I do mean if. While these are a fun aside, it's not the main focus of this channel, and I only want to do them when I have actual downtime between other projects, instead of putting things on hold to cater to popular demand like I'm doing right now. I would say don't expect another follow-up to this until at least next year, and if these videos are the only reason you're subscribed to this channel, you should probably unsubscribe. Though if you want to see what else I do here, which lately has mostly been PS2 homebrew development, then I would recommend starting with this video. The middle part is just a bunch of niche video game trivia, except there's a real practical reason for documenting it. With all those clarifications out of the way, let's get into the actual list. I've switched over to using Tier Maker, where I've recreated my original list because I'm going to be adding to it quite a bit. The first thing I need to do, though, is re-rank the elevator from Doom 3. While this is one of the absolute best examples in my opinion, several people pointed out that it doesn't actually meet my requirements for an Akira elevator. And upon further review, they appear to be right. At the bottom of the tunnel, the track transitions from a diagonal incline to a flat section that leads into the station platform. I didn't catch this originally, because the flat portion of the track gets destroyed before you reach the bottom, and the elevator stops right at the point where that transition happens. Due to this, I'm forced to demote Doom 3 from an S tier to the newly added Honorable Mention tier. This elevator is still really good though. Speaking of Doom, the first new elevator I'm going to be adding to this list is from Doom 2016. This one is fairly basic at its core, but it's elevated quite a bit by the very unique and extremely detailed shaft design. The lighting and framing of this area are excellent, and of course we can't forget about the music. I think putting this elevator side by side with the one from Doom 3 perfectly illustrates the difference in tone between these two games. This one goes in A tier. Our second game is also one from 2016, Titanfall 2. The elevator in this one is fairly generic for an Akira elevator, but it is nice and big and is fairly well detailed. It moves a bit faster than I generally like, but I can forgive that here since it seems like the speed was chosen to complement the fast-paced gameplay. Unfortunately, this elevator doesn't get a ton of focus, both because the ride is over so fast, and because you'll be distracted by the plot-relevant set piece happening overhead. Still, this one would be at least a C tier in my book, if it weren't for one major flaw. After getting on the elevator, the game fades to black and cuts to a loading screen, then fades back in as you're approaching the next area. They took an elevator section, which are commonly used to mask load times, and interrupted it with a loading screen. I should also point out that Titanfall 2 runs on a modified version of the source engine, whose load screens normally look like this. This would have been way better than fully cutting away from the action. Titanfall 2 elevator goes in D tier. Now, at the end of the previous video, I mentioned that I had a vague recollection of an Akira elevator in at least one of the Metroid Prime games. Well, it seems my intuition was correct, as there are a few scattered throughout the trilogy. The first one of these is at the beginning of Prime 1. It's relatively small and has a fully enclosed cab with a unique design to it. Visibility from within the cab is fairly limited unless you walk right up to the window, and the ride down is also pretty short and uneventful, save for a very satisfying bit of screen shake upon reaching the bottom. This one isn't all that memorable, and could easily be mistaken for a standard elevator if you weren't paying attention. I do like the cab design though, so for that I'm gonna put it in C tier. Later on, you have to navigate up the flooded shaft of another similar elevator, though this one gets an honorable mention since there's no actual elevator for me to rank here. There's another honorable mention in Metroid Prime 2, where you take this elevator up to the next area after getting the super missiles. This one starts out at an angle, but quickly transitions into a more standard vertical elevator. Finally, we have Metroid Prime 3, which has two proper Akira elevators. Both of these appear to just be reskinned versions of the elevator from Prime 1, but those new skins do count for something. The first one is an open platform that gets enclosed by a set of 4 energy barriers while in motion. The elevator ride is very short, but at least this is a fairly unique design. The second elevator is found towards the end of the game and is much more striking in its design. The elevator shaft is rounded, as are the energy barriers that act as doors on either side of the semi-enclosed platform. This elevator ride is about double the length of the first one, and the whole time it feels like you're moving through some sort of mechanical insect tunnel. I'm going to give the first Prime 3 elevator a high C tier, and the second one a low B. Next up, we have Sonic Adventure 2. This game has two very similar Akira elevators. The first one is found in the first Tails level, and it's pretty good. The platform is a decent size, and moves at a good speed without being too fast. There's even a combat encounter on the way up. The elevator shaft for this one is absolutely massive compared to the size of the lift, and has a ton of great detail. I especially like the huge spinning cogs on either side. Very cool and unique design that I haven't seen anywhere else. The only major problem I have with this one is the god-awful weapon lock-on sound, which brings the vibe down a bit. Solid B tier. The second elevator is in the first Eggman level. It uses most of the same assets, including the enemies you fight on the way down, though this is masked somewhat by the pulsating red filter over the entire screen that's supposed to look like a siren. Unfortunately, they left out both the steam jets and the giant cogs, and I'm not really sure why, as it's the exact same shaft design otherwise. The one other unique thing about this one is the bridge that extends out when the lift reaches this door. That's pretty neat, but it doesn't make up for the lack of giant spinning cogs, and I find the siren effect to be rather grating. This one goes in C tier. Our next Akira elevator comes from a game that I was surprised to see so many people mention: Castle Crashers. This one is quite unique conceptually. It's set in a castle, so it has a steampunk aesthetic rather than the usual sci-fi or cyberpunk. We've got these two giant pulleys on the front quarters of the platform, hoisting it up an angled brick shaft with these massive bundles of rope. There are also these gears spinning away over here, but I'm not really sure what they do or how they connect to anything. This design could be one of the coolest ones we've seen yet, if it weren't being held back by the game's art direction. Flat colors and big blocky shapes don't lend themselves well to a lot of fine detail, and the lack of perspective makes it hard to get a clear sense of scale or how things are positioned relative to each other. There is a big fight during the ride up, so it certainly has some points in its favor. I'd actually really like to see some fan art of this one. I want to know what this design looks like when it's shown from a proper 3D perspective. In the meantime though, I'm going to put it in C tier. Switching gears a little bit, let's look at the elevator from Deus Ex Invisible War. The Akira elevator in this game is extremely unique in that it's actually plot relevant, and there's an entire story mission centered around getting it back online after a breakdown. It even has a name, the Inclinator. Unfortunately, the Inclinator is by far the worst Akira elevator I've seen yet. It looks pretty promising at first. We've got this big open room that's dominated by a massive steel platform. But watch what happens when you hit the button. That's right, it just fades out and cuts straight to the other end of the lift. No movement, no animation, not even a pre-rendered cutscene. Just a low-res sound effect and quick fade to black. This isn't an elevator, it's a glorified door. The only reason this one even qualifies for this list is because we can clearly see an angled shaft at the bottom end of the lift. It's called the Inclinator, yet its status as one is 100% implied. It does have a cool looking design, but I'm not going to give it much credit for that since this is all static geometry. It's easy to make something look however you want when it doesn't have to actually function. Frankly, this is an F-tier Akira elevator with A-tier lore, but since I'm only ranking elevators here, it gets to stay in F-tier. The Deus Ex series does have another candidate for an Akira elevator, but I'm not sure whether or not to actually include it. In Human Revolution, there's a diagonal elevator with a fully enclosed cab that actually has a bit of plot relevance as well. The problem is, the game insists on calling it a funicular, but it's not clear whether or not it actually is one. Everything we see of it looks like a fairly standard inclined elevator with an enclosed cab. There doesn't appear to be a second cab or an adjacent track anywhere. And if there was, you'd think there'd be a second elevator door, and Jensen could just take whatever cab is already at the top of the track instead of having to wait 3 minutes. All the evidence here points to this one counting as an Akira elevator, but the game insists on calling it a funicular, and what we actually see is limited enough that I can't be entirely certain it isn't one. So I'm going to put this in honorable mentions for now, and leave it up to a community poll to see if you guys think this one should count for the list. If people decide that it does, I'll post a short giving it a rating in like a week or two. In the meantime, let's take a look at the elevator at the end of F.E.A.R. To even get to this one, you first have to open these giant mechanical silo doors, which is already pretty cool. The lift itself is surprisingly small considering the massive room that it's housed in. It's got a fairly basic boxy gray design, except for the control panel, which for some reason is a whole-ass computer mounted to a steel plate. The ride down is probably the most tense and atmospheric of any elevator in this video so far, and it lowers down into a giant reactor core, which is just fantastic. This one would be an easy B tier, maybe even an A tier, except they did the thing where the elevator ride gets interrupted by a goddamn loading screen. At least this one doesn't seem to skip anything, but still, that means I've got to knock it down to a C tier. Very disappointing. Next up, we have Xenoblade Chronicles. This one sees the party ride up a mineshaft on a lift that's absolutely massive, but fairly basic in its design. Partway up, the elevator abruptly stops, and the boss that was seemingly defeated in the prior section comes back for round 2. This sequence is absolutely a cut above any of the other elevator fights I've looked at, and the cutscene after you beat him has some genuinely excellent cinematography. I particularly like this shot. My only real gripes are that we only ever see the elevator move in cutscenes, and that it cuts away so we don't get to see the second half of the elevator ride after the boss is defeated. But then, immediately afterward, there's another cutscene that shows the party running away as the explosion from the boss's death blows out the entrance to the elevator shaft. I think this one deserves an A tier. Our next game is Star Wars The Force Unleashed, specifically the Chrome Studios version released on the PS2, PSP, Wii, and Nintendo Switch. This game has probably the most interesting arrangement of Akira elevators I've ever seen. There are 2 identical lifts on opposite sides of this massive room, similar to what we saw in Silent Bomber in the last video. But only one of them is working. Once you reach the upper level, a third elevator carrying stormtroopers comes down at an opposing angle. After fighting off the enemies on the catwalk, you ride this elevator up to the top level of this impossibly tall room, which leads into the next area. These elevators individually are decent, but arranged like this, it makes for one of the most unique implementations of an Akira elevator I've ever seen. For that alone, this one goes in A tier. Alright, getting towards the end now, and next up is Cyberpunk 2077, specifically the Phantom Liberty DLC. The elevator in this one is frankly phenomenal. It's a closer match to the original Akira elevator design than any game I've seen other than Half-Life. The platform is huge, and the shaft is absolutely massive. The atmosphere in this area is basically perfect. The lighting, the sound design, the steam coming off the pipes, the way the floodlights turn on with a bang as you approach them. I don't think this could reasonably be improved. The descent is long enough that there's time for a chat with Keanu Reeves, with breaks in between to soak in the atmosphere and build tension. It's all paced pretty much perfectly. This would already be more than enough to land this one in S tier, but they still felt the need to go for the hat trick and do something I've never seen before. Just as you're about to reach the bottom, the lift stalls out and you have to make a daring leap across a bottomless pit to get off the platform. This is awesome, and I don't think it's possible to improve this sequence in any meaningful way. If you're a game designer and want to put one of these elevators in your game, this is the standard you should be aspiring to. For the penultimate entry in this video, we have the elevator from the Destiny 2 Arms Dealer Strike. People hyped this one to hell and back, so I'm expecting something really good here. First impressions are great. The design of the lift is fantastic. It's big and bulky with a lot of great detail. It kind of reminds me of the Warhammer or Gears of War aesthetic. The sound effects are also pretty good, assuming you can hear them over the music and near constant sound of gunfire. And that leads me on to the biggest problem with this one. As a multiplayer-focused looter-shooter, Destiny 2 just can't slow down the pace enough to build tension and let an elevator like this really shine. You fight a wave of enemies while boarding the elevator, and then the boss spawns in and starts shooting down at you while you're barely halfway up the shaft. Having the boss spawn in like this would be a great way to catch players off guard in a game that takes its time to actually slow down and build tension leading up to the fight. But here there's not even 30 seconds of downtime between combat encounters. I'm putting this one in B tier, mostly because of the excellent elevator design. It would probably be A tier if this sequence were better paced. And last, but certainly not least, is the game that received by far the most mentions in the comments of my last video. Halo 2. The elevator most people mentioned was the one on Cairo Station at the beginning of the game, and yeah, it's pretty good. The elevator is already on its way up to you as you enter the room, and it's carrying a wave of enemies for you to fight off. The lift itself is nice and slow, and I like the fact that there's 2 different levels to it. That's something we haven't seen before. There's no enemies or anything else going on the way down, so you can actually breathe for a minute and admire this set piece that I think is supposed to be a giant cannon. Sorry, I'm not up on the Halo lore. Definitely better paced than the one in Destiny, and I think it deserves an A tier. Now, a couple people also mentioned there being an Akira elevator in the second level of Halo 3. I looked, and while there are some large freight elevators, none of them run diagonally. If someone can point me to the exact elevator they're referring to, I'd be curious to see it. As it is, I was surprised to find that I've actually played the majority of these games before. Yet, aside from Metroid, I had no recollection of any of these elevators when I first started making this video. However, the elevator sequences this time were shorter and less significant on average. I don't think it's a coincidence that the highest ranked entries in this video are from games I either haven't played before or haven't played in a very long time. I would say to leave any suggestions you may have for a potential part 3 in this series, but I've already got plenty to work with, and I'm sure people are going to do that regardless of if I ask. So instead, I'll just say like the video, subscribe to this channel, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys later.